issue on the African scene, the politics of succession in Africa, the crisis of stability and power. How critical is this?
Police arrested 4 people for the violence in Johannesburg, while 8 others were arrested.
As Africa continues to open up after months of lockdown from the COVID-19 challenge, the question of leadership's response and the crackdown and erosion of civil liberties come to question. Is it just a question of trust between the state and citizens, or there is a deliberate agenda to gradually move from a democratic experience to a socialist state? And these are the questions we'll be asking on today's edition of The Agenda. My name is Henry Williams. Welcome to the show. And don't forget, you can join us online at www.loveworldplus.tv or go to any of the online stores to download our app, Love World Plus. Well, with that out of the way, we will set sail on today's discussion, looking to this issue, the issue of government responses and the erosion of civil liberties. So let's take this report and we will be right back. The COVID-19 challenge has required unprecedented actions from governments pretending to safeguard the rights to life and health. While some countries opted for a soft approach to COVID-19, a number of African countries took a more strict approach, which meant the introduction of stringent lockdowns and state of emergencies. The state of emergency waivers specific regulations, widens the head of the state's powers beyond the ideal permissive scope, and authorizes additional resources. But were these restrictions directed towards a legitimate objective and based on scientific evidence, and neither arbitrary nor discriminatory in application?
The National Coronavirus Command Council has decided to enforce a nationwide lockdown for 21 days with effect from midnight on Thursday, the 26th of March.
Some of these measures will surely cause major inconveniences to many citizens, but these are sacrifices we should all be willing and ready to make for the greater good of our country.
The recently published Mo Ibrahim Foundation survey illustrates that most of the respondents expressed their belief that the pandemic provides the means to limit civil society participation and freedom of assembly, and consider it has an impact on human rights and civil liberties. Of the 105 respondents, 66.7% agree that COVID-19 threatens human rights and liberties across the 35 countries surveyed. The shutdown of the internet in Ethiopia restricted millions of people from accessing crucial information through digital communications. South Africa, Kenya, and Nigeria reported to have some of the stiffest lockdowns on the continent, with numerous reports of police overstepping their bounds and law enforcement killing more people compared to COVID-19 while enforcing lockdown restrictions. There has been a huge outcry by healthcare workers across several African countries, mainly relating to the poor working conditions and inadequate personal protective equipment that prevent them from effectively doing their work. A major snag is that some cannot protest as the state of emergency regime prevents them from doing so, even when freedom of assembly is essential to democracy, as protests are a vital tool available to the public to push for accountability of government and social change. It is confounding how quickly civil liberties have been set aside with governments responding to the pandemic. Many checks and balances have been pushed aside, new orders emerge every day, and the rule of law is playing catch-up, a traditional conspicuous feature of African politics and civil culture. The imminent fear is that the decline of human rights will continue even beyond the COVID-19 challenge, which many analysts see as an agenda based on unscientific submissions and laws from a World Health Organization facing a credibility crisis. All right, so not a very flattering report. And when you talk of the responses from government on the continent and those, they take instructions from global organizations like the WHO, but don't take my word for it. I have my guest joining me here on the show, and his name is Adeni Kuno, a journalist, a veteran journalist at that. Thank you, Ani, for joining me on the agenda.
Thank you for having me this afternoon.
Great to have you. And yes, we look forward to speaking with Ambrose Igboke, who joins us online. He will be speaking from the eastern part of Nigeria, also bringing his experience as a public affairs analyst to this discussion. But looking at that report, Ni, it does give us a lot to deepen the discussion with, talking about the government's reaction to the so-called pandemic, where many have seen more or less their predictions, more like doomsday predictions for Africa, never coming to light. And we wonder, what was the actual, actual purpose of this whole panic that was brought on a continent that was grappling economically and trying to rise up from the ashes? But this really took us some way backward.
Well, since the first infection, 25th of February in Egypt, and what came afterwards, where you have the Bill and Melinda Gates spearheads, especially the wife, see the doomsday prediction, as he called it. A number of factors have actually come to show that we might be humans in one way or the other, together with every other person, but as systems. Talking about physiognomy, talking about what we're made up of from what we have over there. There's a recent report that I saw that obviously Africa is 17% of the world population.
Okay.
And only recently we have just 3.5% of the entire world deaths. In September, Africa surpassed the 1 million death mark with about 38 million infections as we speak. And bringing it home to Nigeria, we have in excess of 60,000 infections with over 52,000 recoveries with about 1,111 deaths. So it tells you that it is a very insignificant numbers. But there's something interesting that the report reveals, which is that the relative age of the people who are in this country, talking about those who are millennials, as it were, is really higher than any part of the world. They talk about the age factor, that has accounted for why we're not dying as predicted. And then they also talked about, immunity that has been developed over time. We will agree, Henry, that we do not have a fantastic healthcare system. So the body, as God has created it over time, has been able to develop resilience. So when you talk about COVID-19 as some kind of death sentence, as we find in the country called the US that has the highest infection rate at the moment, it is not the same as ourselves. Thirdly, you want to talk about our eating habits. Across the Atlantic, they eat more of dough products, talking about pastries. You find out that on almost everything they do, there's desserts. And at times, the desserts are artificial sweetness. And we know that there's a level you consume sugar to, it actually begins to impede the excellent functioning of the human body. That is also indicative. But in this part of the world, I could move from point A to point B and take a cola nut and throw it in my mouth. I could get home at night and drink some herbal concoction. So our habits of ingesting certain things differs from what Europe has given to the world or America with respect to the doomsday prediction. So we've defied them on a lot of grounds. Then there's a recent scientific discovery that there's a type of gene called the haplotype gene. The haplotype gene has its predominance in Asia, where the infectious rate is also high. And it was discovered that about 30% of the entire Asians have that type of gene. And it is not a strong gene because it makes you become predisposed to having COVID-19. It was also found out that Europeans have about 8% of our population carry that same haplotype gene. Say, Eureka, such a gene was not found in Africa. So if 30% of the entire Asian population have this composition of this gene that will make them be predisposed to some kind of ailment because of the gene they have, it tells you then that there are certain things that seem to be working right. And don't forget that they keep talking about Africa not testing enough. Since in sciences we don't talk about conjectures, we talk about figures. Right. We'd have to stay with the figures we have done with so far and deal with that. Let nobody make conjectures for us.
But really looking at what has happened recently, a lot of people have raised questions about the powers that have been wielded as a result of the COVID-19. Has it been a cover for governments to actually take the civil liberties that belong to the people and own it to their detriment. And we've seen lockdowns and freedom of assembly becoming something of a crime, which is essential to a democratic experience.
Yes, it has gone from the ludicrous to the ridiculous. There's a particular suit filed in New York State as we speak, because Cuomo, in my own estimation, is beginning to act as a dictator. I know that in New York State, there are a number of people that also prefer that would like to keep with the health protocol. But I'm beginning to wonder where a non-doctor, although he's a governor, has the right to prescribe that people compulsorily wear a mask. And it's been said that the mask itself doesn't stop the COVID-19 infection. It therefore defies logic, especially as a person who administers more or less like, if not the biggest state in the United States of America, it's called it the Big Apple. You'd agree with me that when somebody goes out and begins to impede what's usually as rightly called civil liberties, then you have to understand what's the intent of these people doing that. But if you look at Africa, for the greater part of the lockdown, Africa did not have its own health protocol. It was all just copy and paste all they had abroad, up until the time the airlines opened on the 5th of last month, where they started talking about, okay, guidelines for those coming in as announced by the Presidential Task Force team, Hadi Sirika, the aviation minister, and many of them. We never had our own homegrown health protocol. And it stems from the fact that we perhaps have not done enough research into understanding first the number of people we have and the number of health cases that we're dealing with, that we're grappling with. And if you look at the fact that in my own estimation, I should say, the COVID-19 has been blown out of proportion. And as I mentioned, it's gone from the ludicrous to the ridiculous. For instance, they tell you in certain quarters, you cannot sing because the virus travels. And if you look at what has happened again, the media is also assuming some kind of authority over the people. Mainstream media, basically. We could be mainstream here, but basically we have a measure of independence. That is your platform, where people are able to explore certain ideas. And that is what some other media organizations do not often appreciate, where you're able to say it as it is. There's a paper recently brought forth by a German medical doctor who says that over time, the use of nose mask actually reduces the supply of oxygen to the brain. And in 10, 15, 20 years, you begin to have people who use the mask suffer from dementia. Now, that is a fact of sciences, but it seems as if governments are not allowing themselves to listen to very solid medical findings that people's lives are going to get affected in the course of time. And if you also look at it, it's been very shameful that the likes of Facebook, particularly the biggest culprit of all, appears to be working with some people without faces or with faces and without names. And that is why I'm saying that people at this point must begin to stand for themselves and understand that in the first place, government is there because we put you there. And if at all you want to bring up regulation for the good governance of the people that voted you in, consultations are necessary. So it's becoming something that is out of hand, where you have people locked down and hold people down against their will, imprison them and make them become slaves just because they are refusing to listen to what you think is good for them, but in actual fact, it's not very pleasing to them.
You talked about the copy and paste mentality of African governments. I wish that copy and paste some wish that that copy and paste would have been actually a copy and paste. I mean, it seems that it was more like a la carte, a selective copy and paste, in the sense that our governments did leave out some things that they should have borrowed as well from, you know, Western climes.
Exactly.
Like the palliatives and support that, you know, that were left out from vulnerable Africans whose business and livelihood were taken away from them for over 3 months without any interventions whatever. This lockdown has been for a lot of people a death sentence.
Okay, that's fantastic. You've brought a very important point to bear. Saudi Arabia, if you did the exchange rate and you're talking about their minimum wage, at the moment is in excess of about 500,000 in naira. Saudi Arabia. Don't forget that in the Independence Day of the president, he did a comparison that they pay more for fuel there. But the president didn't actually look at the value of the naira to the rial that is being spent there. And let me tell you this for the records. During this pandemic, the Saudi Arabian government paid 60% of the salaries of all private corporations in the whole of Saudi Arabia. 60%. So that simply means if somebody's salary was 500,000 in Saudi Arabia, most definitely the government will be paying more or less like 300,000 of that. Government paid private organizations, members of staff salaries, and they did that for 3 to 4 months. Now, I don't know if it's on this platform that I've said it before, that during this particular pandemic, the entire Asia, particularly Asian countries, actually spent 13% of their GDP on palliatives. The entire Europe did about 8% of their GDP on palliative, but Africa did 0.1%, the entire Africa 0.1% of our GDP. So it tells you that while Africa is trying to be holier than the Pope, Africa is not actually behaving as though they are in Vatican City and acting as the Pope himself would have acted. By implication, I'm saying that our government seems to be very fast in latching onto some things that favor them. Don't forget that there was a time they talk about the vaccine bill and all of that they mentioned was brought into the country from Singapore. That actually raised issues where you also have the coalition of Nigeria, the political parties, CUPP, as led by Imo Ugochinyere, who said that about 10 million was given to Femi Gbajabiamila, of course at the allegation level, allegation that for them to do that. And up until this time, he died a quick death because Nigerians reacted. So I'm saying, as you rightly said, that government here has demonstrated its capacity to take people for granted and not actually recognize that in a democracy, people engage more on fair grounds and justice than the way it has been doing. And it's really, really a sad reality.
Well, Nia, let's visit the issue of police brutality, the rise in, the violent crackdowns by security forces on citizens who have actually resisted the lockdown, because more or less it's like suffocation. And they had to react to that. We've seen a report saying that, look, due to police brutality, at one certain point in time, we even saw more deaths than the so-called COVID-19. Yeah. That has been a big question. Is it allowed to? Are they allowed to do this to keep us safe, or how far should governments go?
When government has a history of being, I have to choose my words, irresponsible, the impact or the effect of that happens over time. And it therefore means that government must endeavor at all times to listen to the people. I'm going to refer to a particular incident that happened over 48 hours ago that shows that government doesn't seem to be listening or respecting the people. The social media advisor, as it were, of the government, of the president, Loretta Onoche, recently got appointed, of course subject to the confirmation by the Senate, to be a national INEC resident commissioner, as it were, or an INEC commissioner. Loretta Onoche obviously is a woman who... A card-carrying member of the APC. And we're talking about a supposedly independent National Electoral Commission. Now,
which has its constitution.
Which has its constitution. So a situation where the government, without recourse to what the people would say or do, the president actually appointed Loretta Onoche among many others. I think there were 12. It shows that government doesn't have regard for what the people feel.
Could it have been an oversight?
Excuse me, then it should have fired all his advisors, because for such documents to have actually been submitted to the lawmakers, having put it together, you'd expect somebody like I think the man who took over from Abba Kyari, the Gambari man, to have actually looked at the paperwork. You'd expect many other persons to have looked at it before it was submitted. So those who actually have allowed the oversight should actually leave the office.
All right, let's bring in Ambrose. Ambrose is standing by. Hello, Ambrose. Thanks for joining us on the agenda. Are you there?
Yes, good afternoon.
All right, great to hear your voice loud and clear. Now, Ambrose, we're talking about the COVID-19 challenge and the advent it has brought in terms of the crackdown on civil liberties and reaction of African governments. Algeria, Burkina Faso, Uganda, some of those that actually place an absolute prohibition on the right to peaceful assembly. And question asked, is this sacrifice necessary for the fight against this challenge?
Well, first of all, the African leaders over the years, especially the last 40 35 years, have proved to be highly responsible to their citizens. They rather prefer to be playing a kind of limited role to the powers that be, to Europe and America and the advanced countries. So having said that, they have no respect for human rights in their societies, in their various countries. We have seen there are so many abuse of human rights across the length and breadth of Africa as a whole, and the intervention of a lot of international bodies like the ICC to be able to, even bring some of the African leaders to book. The typical African leader has a despotic disposition where he believes that he is the feudal lord, he is the monarch, he is an absolute ruler, and therefore does not conform to any constitutional authority. We have seen so many of the African leaders suspend the constitution. So I'm not surprised that the welfare of the citizens of many of these African countries is not the prerogative of the leaders in Africa. The leaders in Africa are interested in looting, in emptying the treasury of their citizens. They're interested in embezzling money and taking it to Europe to stash the banks in Switzerland, in Cayman Islands, and in the Caribbean. That is what they're interested in. So they are not interested in their citizens. And so there's a lot of capital flight over the years that have gone out of Africa into private accounts and flush funds and those kind of things. Coming to the pandemic, we find out that African leaders have no template or homemade solutions to the myriad of problems confronting the modern society. For example, they have no remedy for economic prosperity. They copy everything, all the templates that IMF, the World Bank, and everybody has to give to them. Whether it suits the African economy or not, they have to import those things from the United States or from France or from Germany or from wherever, or China. So there's no homegrown economic templates for Africans in Africa. Everything we use is imported from Asia, be it in economic policies, be it in trade plans, be it in multilateral and agreements and the rest. We are forced to sign. In fact, there was this allegation that some of the documents that our Nigerian leaders signed were actually written in Chinese, in Mandarin. And I was wondering what somebody will sign, what somebody can read. There's a lot of equipment, especially machines, that are imported to Africa, foreign languages in them that cannot even be read by our people. So that goes to show the level of thinking, the thinking of the leadership. Coming to the Corona era, we find out that...
Okay, I think Ambrose, the connection there just went with Ambrose. But we'll take a quick break. When we come back, the question being raised here, has the COVID-19 challenge brought on an opportunity for governments to actually gain more powers, and take the democratic dispensation to the left? Join us again after the break for more on the agenda. Don't go away.
we must remember that every one of us has something to give, something to contribute. Only Nigerians can help develop Nigeria. All that we require in our nation for our prosperity, our security, our progress will come from within us, and therefore each one of us must be ready and willing to be a vital part of it.
All right, welcome back. In case you just joined us, you're watching The Agenda. We just went for a short break and we are back. And don't forget, you can watch us on the go, www.loveworldplus.tv, or go to any of the online stores to download our app. We are looking at COVID-19 in Africa, government responses, and the erosion of civil liberties. And I can tell you, we've had a lot to talk about with my guest here, Niyi Kuno, giving us his insights from an African perspective as usual. And we just had a call online with our guest, Ambrose Igboke, and we certainly hope we can get him back. But coming to Niyi, there is no doubt that this challenge has exposed the vulnerability of our different sectors, health, security, and all of that.
Well, it's very obvious that when you do not plan, the day of reckoning comes. More or less like if you told me that I'm going to be on your program and I went to sleep, rather than actually put my research materials together and try to understand the kernel of the story. It's the same thing with a lot of African leaders who, over the years, have actually become stooges rather than independent leaders of their respective countries. One of the misfortunes that we had was close to the period that the Second World War ended, or about the time it ended, particularly in 1945. That's when the world got into the economic models that they refer to as the Bretton Woods institution model. Although they tell you that it doesn't exist any longer, but that's balderdash. The model is what makes people oftentimes spend more than they have. Yeah. They go into debt. And that's the reason you have that the US currency appears to be the most accepted in terms of it being across the world. That started after the Second World War. And you find out that at the point that China had decided that, well, we can't have that happen. People can also keep their reserves in yen. That also has shaken the particular bouquet of flowers that America used to be in possession of. But having said that, it is the fact that Africa must reinvent itself. On the screen earlier, we had African Voices. And one of the man who is a lawyer from Kenya there talks about the fact that third world is a state of mind. That means we have to grab ourselves by the bootstrap and get out of it.
And also might get to a sixth world if you're
sixth world. So, and how do we do that? Because this is not only in Nigeria, it's an African thing. Now let me go to Egypt. Hosni Mubarak was there for many years. El-Sisi came there not as somebody who had never been in the military. He came there as somebody who converted in less than 2 months after the revolution and switched gears to becoming a civilian. Essentially, they still have a military ruler who just wants to appeal to the people. That is Egypt. If you go to Rwanda, for instance, Rwanda as a country has a retired military officer as the head. If you go to Uganda, the misfortune of Uganda was that in that country, the lawmakers had to review their constitution to allow him run. If you come to Togo, closest to us, the misfortune is still there. And it tells you that it seems as if it's a genomic disorder. And I must also talk about Nigeria. Nigeria, if you look at the 21-year history that we've had, I've said it before and I'll say it again, we've had retired military generals rule the country for more period. So that simply means those who have the ideology of war, who have the ideology of warfare, blueprint, are the ones that have been steering the Nigerian ship. And it has become evident in their responses to citizens' agitations and clamor for good governance that they are essentially still retired military generals. So I've painted a picture across Africa for you to look at it. For instance, you talk about Cyril Ramaphosa. Well, Jacob Zuma messed up his opportunity to have strengthened the African National Congress. Cyril Ramaphosa himself is still a stooge for the whites that are in control of the economy. You could contest with me or anybody listening that what I'm saying is wrong, but Cyril Ramaphosa himself is a man who has not allowed his own people to actually thrive the way they should thrive. It therefore means that when you have such dismal picture of leadership on the continent, you can only have people follow whatever dictates they give. And also, let me say this, beyond the quick financial assistance given to most African countries by the African Development Bank or from other institutions, do not also forget that the World Bank and of course the International Monetary Funds have also come to the aid of Nigeria. And one of the things we often do not hear from them, we often talk about the Chinese loans, where at times people have to sign documents written in Chinese, is that some of the loans we get from the IMF and the World Bank are loans that tell you that I'm giving you $10 billion to be paid back maybe over 15 period or so. You have to raise interest rates, you have to increase taxes, you have to deregulate. So what you don't often hear is
how
that,
do you pay back?
How do you pay back? So oftentimes the buck stops at their table, but the responsibility falls on the people's table because they are the ones that
people cannot borrow. Then how do they stimulate the economy?
Problem.
How does growth come
And let
about?
me tell you one of the things going on, because you're talking about civil liberties being truncated. It transcends being able to move from point A to point B at your will. It also touches on every other aspect of your life. So civil liberties is actually the freedom of individuals to actually make decisions.
Yeah, based on that, let me come in here.
Oh, sorry.
This I feel, one might think is a controversial question, I think, but this might be the tipping point of this discussion. Because the question a lot of people are asking is that, why was the state of emergency declared for the COVID pandemic when it wasn't a death sentence on people, as we can clearly see? And when, yes, there have been contrasting submissions from different professionals about, the veracity of this, this COVID-19 name. And then there was no lockdown on the number of killings around the continent, the flashpoints of crisis. There was no lockdown on the emergency of, how do you call it, poverty, widespread poverty on the continent. There was no emergency approach to it. There was no emergency approach to the lack of primary health care throughout the continent. There are pressing issues, urgent issues that actually are taking lives. We saw in the Kaduna crisis with people dying on a daily basis. Some analysts have said a case of genocide might be declared. But you see, there was no state of emergency on these issues. And why the COVID then? Why was it the COVID pandemic?
Well, for many who perhaps should know,
pandemic.
Yes, it's a pandemic for me. I'm not saying that it is not an existing virus. Manufactured in a Chinese laboratory and confirmed to be a virus that was actually manufactured and unleashed from China to the rest of the world. The United Nations is a big culprit. There's an Agenda 2030 where they believe that the age we have should actually switch over. We're talking about
a kind of reset.
A kind of reset, but who gives anybody the capacity? First, you could develop capacity to effect change, but who gives you the authority to be the one to reset people's lives? Who gives you, and that is why many people have also condemned globalization, that the agenda or the fact that you say it's a global village has a lot of disadvantages because it favors a certain group of people, and because it favors a certain group of people, they will continue to profit from it just because they believe that they're in charge of certain models. During this pandemic, Bill Gates' wealth increased, Jeff Bezos' wealth increased, many billionaires make gains during the pandemic. So when the pandemic actually is rendering many people, into poverty, the big guns are making more money. Somebody will say, what's that to do with it? I say it has a lot to do with it. Now let me tell you one of the things people didn't see. Jack Dorsey, the owner of Twitter, actually made a point yesterday by tweeting to support, SARS, and some other major voices spoke. And all I saw were celebrations regarding what Jack Dorsey did. So the Holy Spirit, let me say that, because there's an inner man that helps all of us. Now, in other religions, they say the light shone, and God dwells in the light anyway. So the Holy Spirit opened my eyes to see that on Jack Dorsey's page, you'd have Jack Dorsey, you have Bitcoin. Now, the tweet he put out, he said, support SARS, but the first thing he wrote on his tweet was, more or less raising a fund through Bitcoin, paying Bitcoin, support SARS.
So there is an agenda.
There is an agenda that what they usually do is they latch onto something to make gains of it and also push for the agenda. I tell you, with every sense of humility, I happen to be the first person that God opened my eyes to see. And if you check my Facebook page, Adeni Ikuno, I actually put it out that, look at what this guy is. As much as you think he's supporting us, he's supporting the cryptocurrency business operations. That's a business model created by them. And that is where they gradually want to move everybody onto. And they are pushing very hard. But at times, millennials don't quite have that hindsight to see. They didn't quite see. They felt, okay, it's a fundraising. He said fundraise on Bitcoin. Then he said end SARS. So people just saw end SARS. They didn't understand that this guy is pushing an economic model to enrich himself and make more people come onto a platform, because by doing that, they're expanding the cost of whatever it is they want to achieve. So that is quite revelatory. And if you also look at it, as much as we know that this protest doesn't have a kind of leader, we also have to tell you that it's a reaction to many years of repression, many years of suppression. And it's a reaction to the fact that you don't take people for granted, because we often look away. And on the streets, it's a reality of the matter. So what I just want to say at this juncture is that Africa, particularly Africans, are the ones that can remedy the misfortunes that it is experiencing. And how do they do that? Is to stay resilient and not allow some globalized influence. Let me tell you this.
To hijack it. I get your point now, but we want to get some reactions. When we talk about cut and paste, how realistic was the lockdown, especially with the realities we have on ground? I believe Ambrose is with us again. Okay, but we'll take Ambrose after this report from Makoko, the Makoko people expressing their own side of the story concerning this sweeping powers government has wielded. Let's take a look and we'll be right back.
Concerns mount for the welfare of vulnerable Nigerian community over the coronavirus challenge. The Makoko neighborhood is home to tens of thousands of people living in stilt shanties built along the Lagos Lagoon. Inhabitants here have been warned by the government and community leaders on good hygienic practices. However, some are adamant that the waterways are safe, and so they continue to drink the water, saying they will not be infected by the virus.
Concerning the coronavirus, we were told to wash our hands very well before eating. There is no disease in the streams of Makoko. We have been living here for a very long time. I was born here and there is no disease here.
Albert Ainde is Makoko community leader. He said despite the scare, he's doing his bit to help the neighbors ensure good hygienic practices.
Look at my compound. My children have been awake since 6 a.m. to clean up the surroundings. And that is how it is across the floating community. And we have been informing people that after using the washroom to wash their hands thoroughly clean before going to eat, because of what is happening now, we are very scared.
There seems to be a crisis of trust between the state and citizens as different measures and regulations are adopted due to the COVID-19 challenge. But the key things needed for this are transparency and accountability. With no palliatives to ease the burden of those in the informal sector, those who live in slums like Makoko are like, what could be worse than poverty, and are more concerned about putting food on the table and sending their children to school.
All right, that story tells us, that report tells us the story, and I say to Nii, what could be worse than poverty and the ability to, living from hand to mouth? What could be worse?
Well, there's nothing...
Is COVID-19 as deadly?
I think there was a report I saw that 8,000 children die daily from hunger. 8,000. Maybe I didn't quite get the figure right, so just permit me if I'm not spot on with that. but people die in their thousands from hunger every day.
I think we have more deaths from even road accidents.
Quite frankly, in fact, malaria also does a lot of...
Malaria?
Malaria. And if you look at...
Ironically, on the WHO website, COVID-19 is not even a top 10.
But, you know, I don't know why people are not allowing the God-given brains they have to be put to use, and that is my worry. The media particularly usually goes with a lot of international organizations when it comes to getting information out. In fact, I listened to Ardern, the Prime Minister of New Zealand, at some point, saying, people should not, don't listen to any other. We will give you the information. You don't have to listen to any other person. And I looked at such hypocrisy. Does it mean people, and what many do not understand is she's trying to control the source of the information. She's trying to tell them, don't listen to any other. So even if government makes mistakes, which they repeatedly do, and there are alternative sources where people could give them fact, they should look away from fact and get into your error. So I tell you that people should wake up. And I tell you, the people that will actually help, you know, evolve from this control system that we seem to want to be operating are the young ones who have their future ahead of them. And they are the ones that are protesting even at the moment. And I really want to say that Nigerians in general must wake up. I'm happy that some people are waking up.
Africa must wake up.
Africa must wake up. But, you know, it becomes impossible to wake up in good time. And I have to say this, Henry.
And what role does Nigeria play in this mix, in the scheme of things?
Oh, Nigeria at the moment might be considered strong by virtue of the opportunities that are abound that are not properly exploited. We don't actually harness our potentialities enough, being the most populous-backed nation and a country where you have a lot of mineral resources, because leadership itself has not woken up. Okay, just tell me one good reason why I need a first degree to be employed to get to level 8 or level 7 at a government organization, but the president of the country needs to just have sat for ordinary level, that is what we call the SSCE, or the WAEC, the WASC, as it were, for him or her, maybe in the future, to become a president or a governor. People allowed that to happen. And if people were wise enough, why would anybody say that I need more qualification to get a paid job, but the president just need to sit and not? So that means if you have an O level and you have complete fail in all the subjects, maybe 8, 9, or 7, you can still be a president over somebody that spent approximately 7 years or so, if you're a medical doctor, to obtain your degree, and maybe 8 or 9 years to get a master's, and your president needs lesser qualification to control people. We are the ones that should begin to use our brains, because it's plain stupid to have allowed that in the first place.
Okay, our time is fast spent, Nee, and yes, I still have one more question before we go.
Okay.
And you know, it's gotten into a space where Africans don't even believe in this whole, issue of COVID-19 anymore. If you've gotten into the informal sector, the slums like Makoko, they're like, I'm dying anyway. I mean, look at where I'm living. But one thing is for sure, Africans have developed a sort of homegrown resilience and, yes, how do you call it? Defense mechanism to whatever is thrown at us.
Let me tell you one thing.
Can you round off with that?
Yes, of course. I remember when I was younger, I played football for a great deal of time. I remember when I first of all started into very competitive competition, my ankles used to ache me a great deal because there were knocks. I used to play in the attack. There were lots of knocks. So it got to a time, after several knocks, the ankle developed strength of its own accord. My muscles became tougher. That is the way the immune system works. When the immune system is,
being
bombarded by certain things, the body has the natural ability to actually evolve such strength. And that is why also they tell you, for instance, and I'm going to say this, the female reproductive organ, for instance, is self-cleaning. So they tell you, don't doubt, don't put chemicals into your body, because God has so created in such a way that you only need water. And that is why if we did a comparison of women that are having something like thrush and those who live in villages that oftentimes don't use chemicals for their private parts, you'd find out that they don't have such problems, because water and nature combines, and water and chemicals is the same thing for the human system. And I have to tell you this, that we must develop our templates and allow science to be about truth and not lies.
Nice. Fantastic. Nee, thank you so much, and it's been great having you on the agenda.
Thank you for the privilege.
I want to thank Ambrose Igboke, yes, who tried to join us on the show due to connection issues, but had to go. Thank you so much for joining us, and to you, most especially our viewers, for being on today's edition of the agenda. It's been great having you join us. Regional organizations such as the African Union Peace and Security Council and civil society must be heedful and prevent the receding of rights to ensure social and political stability during and the post-COVID-19. Looking at the issues, we'll leave you with a soundbite, and comes from someone who's not in the political class, but someone who has impacted millions of lives and actually being a voice, more or less in the wilderness, against a so-called pandemic, which some claim is, some actually submit as a plandemic against Africa. I'll leave you with that. And remember, my name is Henry Williams, and that only Africans can build Africa. Thanks for staying with us, and see you same time. Bye-bye. God bless you.
We need leaders in Africa that can think. Leaders that have a brain, that have some mind, that have a vision. Even as a young person in the university, I was just a young guy in the university. I made up my mind, still as a young kid, that I will never go to another country to beg for money or anything. And I haven't done it.
Glory. Yes, sir. Yes.
I haven't done it, I never will.
Yes, sir.
Wake up and think.
Yes.
Paul said, when I was a child, I thought like a child. When I became a man, I put away childish things. When will Africa put away childish things?
Yes. Hallelujah. Yes.
Every nation in Africa, listen, Africa is old enough. At this time, every nation in Africa that is still calling for help from another country, the leadership is a shame.
Yes, sir.
Issue on the African scene, the politics of succession in Africa, the crisis of stability and power. How critical is this?
Police arrested 12 people for the violence in Johannesburg, while 8 others were arrested.